December 23, 1944. Camp Crossville, Tennessee. Obergefreiter Hans Weber stepped through the barbed wire gates, his Wehrmacht uniform caked with mud from the Atlantic crossing, his mind prepared for starvation rations and brutal interrogation. He had been trained to expect privation, perhaps a slow death from neglect in accordance with what Minister Goebbels had promised awaited all German soldiers in enemy hands. What he witnessed instead, through the winter mist rolling across the Cumberland Plateau, would dismantle every certainty the Third Reich had constructed in his mind over 6 years of war. American guards were unloading crates labeled Christmas turkey and holiday hams by the dozen. And they were joking about having ordered too much food. For Obergefreiter Weber and the 372,000 German prisoners of war who arrived at camps across the United States between 1943 and 1945, the collision between Nazi propaganda and American reality began not with political lectures or re-education programs, but with something far more powerful and immediate: holiday meals that defied everything they understood about their enemy. According to declassified documents from the War Department's Prisoner of War Operations Division, housed in the National Archives at College Park, Maryland, the first major wave of German prisoners arrived in American camps in late 1943, following the North Africa Campaign. Military planners had prepared extensive security protocols, expecting hardened Nazi ideologues who might attempt sabotage, organized resistance, or mass suicide attempts. The 600-page manual Security Procedures for Axis Prisoners, German Psychological Profile and Containment Strategies dedicated 23 pages to preventing escapes and managing fanatical National Socialist elements. What actually happened during the first Christmas season caught American commanders completely unprepared, not because of violence or resistance, but because of tears. Colonel James McCarthy, commanding officer of Camp Crossville in Tennessee, recorded in his official log, now preserved at the Tennessee State Library and Archives, his observations from December 25, 1944, Christmas Day. Distributed holiday meals as per Geneva Convention requirements. Expected stoic acceptance or perhaps suspicious refusal. Instead witnessed grown men weeping openly at dinner tables. One prisoner, a former schoolteacher named Friedrich Hartmann, approached me after the meal and asked, in broken English, if this was normal food for American soldiers. When I confirmed that yes, our troops ate comparable meals, he sat down on the ground and put his head in his hands. Later learned through interpreters that many prisoners believed the meal was a propaganda trick, that the food couldn't possibly be real. The psychological preparation German soldiers received during their training had painted a specific picture of what awaited them if captured. Training materials recovered from captured Wehrmacht headquarters in France, translated by Army Intelligence and catalogued as Document G2/2847, outlined explicit expectations for German soldiers facing capture. According to these documents, Americans were soft, undisciplined civilians in uniform, lacking the martial spirit necessary for modern warfare. The United States, soldiers were told, was a mongrel nation torn by internal conflict between races and classes, barely able to feed its own population, certainly incapable of properly treating prisoners. Captured soldiers should expect starvation rations, disease, and gradual death from neglect, as the Americans lack both the resources and the will to maintain proper prison camps. Yet here stood Hans Weber, age 24, formerly of the 352nd Infantry Division captured at Normandy, watching American guards carry in a roasted turkey that weighed at least 20 pounds, more meat than his entire company had seen in a month during the siege of Cherbourg. The disconnect between expectation and reality wasn't merely surprising. It was architecturally devastating to his entire understanding of the war. Gefreiter Klaus Becker, captured during the Battle of the Bulge in January 1945, described his first meal in American custody in a letter to his wife that was intercepted by military censors and preserved in the Military Intelligence Service archives at Fort Meade, Maryland. Liebst Martha, I do not know how to write what I have experienced. They fed us not the watery soup or moldy bread we expected, but real food. Meat. Potatoes with butter. Bread that was soft and white. Vegetables. And then, I cannot believe I write this, they brought dessert. Cake, Martha. Actual cake with frosting. I have not eaten cake since our wedding in 1939. The American Guard, a young man from somewhere called Ohio, told me through the interpreter, "Merry Christmas, buddy. War's over for you now." I did not understand if he was being cruel, but his face showed no cruelty. I am more confused now than I was frightened during battle. The revelation of American abundance came in calculated waves, each more psychologically destabilizing than the last. According to intake records from Camp Ruston in Louisiana, which received its first German prisoners in May 1943, the initial medical examinations revealed a population far more malnourished than American authorities had anticipated. Dr. Robert Steinberg, a Jewish-American physician assigned to Camp Ruston's medical facility, maintained detailed case notes later donated to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. His entry from December 20, 1944 provides stark documentation. Examined 47 German prisoners today ahead of Christmas holiday processing. Average age, 26 years. Average weight, 154 pounds, approximately 20 pounds below healthy range for their height. 32 show signs of chronic vitamin deficiencies. 14 have partially healed wounds that received inadequate medical treatment in the field. One prisoner, aged 28, has advanced tooth decay from malnutrition. When I explained we would provide full dental restoration, he asked, without apparent irony, "Why would you waste resources on a prisoner's teeth?" The disconnect between their expectations and our standard medical care is profound. The Geneva Convention of 1929, which both Germany and the United States had ratified, mandated specific treatment standards for prisoners of war. Article 11 required that prisoners receive rations equivalent in quantity and quality to those of depot troops. In practice, this meant German prisoners in American camps ate better than they had as active Wehrmacht soldiers, and far better than German civilians were eating in the bombed cities of the Reich. Camp Concordia in Kansas, which housed 4,000 German prisoners by Christmas 1944, provided daily rations totaling 3,500 calories per prisoner, including meat, fresh vegetables, bread, milk, and periodic desserts. This compared to the approximately 2,000 calories German frontline troops were supposed to receive, though by late 1944, supply disruptions meant many received far less. German civilians in cities like Berlin were surviving on 1,200 calories or less. Underoffizier Otto Schneider, formerly of the 7th Panzer Division captured in France, kept a contraband diary discovered during a routine barracks inspection in January 1945 and later archived at the Kansas State Historical Society. His entry from December 24, 1944 captures the cognitive dissonance. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. The Americans have announced a special holiday meal: turkey, ham, multiple side dishes, and 3 different types of pie. 3 types of pie. This is an elaborate hoax, surely. Yet I have watched the American Guards. They eat the same food from the same kitchens. If this is propaganda, they are subjecting their own men to it as well. I no longer know what to think. If the Americans have such abundance that they can feed prisoners like this, how can we possibly win this war? But the abundance itself was only the surface revelation. Beneath it lay something that challenged German prisoners even more fundamentally: the careful attention to cultural and religious traditions that the godless, materialistic Americans supposedly lacked. At Camp Aliceville in Alabama, which specialized in housing German Afrika Korps veterans, the American command did something that stunned the prisoners. They asked what the Germans needed to properly observe Christmas. Captain Thomas O'Brien, Protestant chaplain assigned to Camp Aliceville, recorded in his duty log, preserved at the Aliceville Museum, an encounter from mid-December 1944, met with prisoner representatives to discuss Christmas observances. Expected minimal interest, perhaps suspicion of propaganda motives. Instead found intense desire to maintain religious traditions. The prisoners requested permission to construct a nativity scene, to hold midnight mass, to sing traditional carols. I approved all requests and offered to supply materials. One prisoner, a former pastor named Martin Dietrich, actually wept. He told me, "We were promised Americans would mock our faith, forbid our worship, treat us as animals. Instead you facilitate our sacred traditions." I do not understand this war anymore. The Christmas of 1944 marked a turning point for thousands of German prisoners. Camp commanders across the United States, working within Geneva Convention guidelines that required respect for prisoners' religious practices, authorized an unprecedented range of holiday observances. Prisoners could attend church services. They could construct nativity displays. They could receive holiday packages through the Red Cross. They could even form choirs to perform traditional German Christmas carols. At Camp Crossville, where Hans Weber spent his first Christmas in captivity, the prisoners organized a Christmas Eve service that drew 800 of the camp's 1,200 Germans. They built a wooden nativity scene, complete with hand-carved figures made in the camp workshop. American guards provided candles. The camp commander arranged for local churches to donate hymnals in German. Weber wrote in a censored letter dated December 28, 1944, "Father, I must tell you something that troubles my conscience greatly. On Christmas Eve, we celebrated midnight mass with more dignity than we managed during the last 2 Christmases in the Wehrmacht. The Americans not only permitted this, they facilitated it. They provided materials, gave us privacy, treated our sacred observance with respect. Everything we were told about American hostility to Christianity appears false. If they lied to us about this, Father, what else was false?" The physical evidence of American abundance extended far beyond holiday meals. Processing records from Camp Forest in Tennessee, which received over 2,800 German prisoners by early 1945, documented the systematic material advantages American camps provided. Prisoners received new clothing to replace their worn Wehrmacht uniforms. They slept in heated barracks with individual cots and clean mattresses. They had access to hot showers with soap, luxuries many hadn't experienced since before deployment. Corporal Wilhelm Mueller, captured in Tunisia in 1943, spent nearly 2 years in American custody. His diary, confiscated during a security sweep and later deposited at the Imperial War Museum in London, chronicles his progressive realization. Week 1, waiting for conditions to worsen. Week 8, conditions remain inexplicably good. Gain 9 pounds. Week 20, received dental work, 3 cavities filled, 1 tooth crowned. Week 40, attended educational classes in English and mathematics. Week 60, the Americans are either playing an impossibly long game, or everything we were told was a lie. I increasingly suspect the latter. The holiday celebrations provided concentrated moments of revelation, but the daily accumulation of small dignities proved equally transformative. American guards addressed prisoners respectfully. Medical care came without hesitation or judgment. Male privileges, though censored, allowed regular contact with families back home. Work assignments paid modest wages in camp scrip that could purchase cigarettes, candy, and toiletries from the camp canteen. But perhaps nothing demonstrated the gulf between Nazi propaganda and American reality more starkly than the Easter celebration of April 1945. By then, Germany was collapsing, the Reich crumbling under combined Soviet and Western pressure. Yet in American camps, German prisoners prepared for Easter with resources that would have been unthinkable on either front. Camp Swift in Texas documented an elaborate Easter observance that included an outdoor altar constructed by prisoners, priest vestments obtained through Red Cross channels, and a feast that surpassed anything most prisoners had eaten in years. The menu, preserved in camp records at the Camp Swift Foundation, listed roasted ham, deviled eggs made with real eggs rather than powder, fresh bread with butter, asparagus, mashed potatoes, and 2 types of pie for dessert. Lieutenant Ernst Wagner had been captured only 3 weeks before Easter 1945. His letter home, dated April 5 and preserved at the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz, reveals the shock of rapid ideological collapse. "Beloved Greta, the war is ending and we have lost, but I must tell you, we have been deceived about everything. The Americans fed us an Easter feast that exceeded our Christmas dinners before the war. They insisted we observe the holy day properly with full religious services. How can these be the enemies we were taught to hate? I fear we have fought on the wrong side of history." May 17, 1946. Bremerhaven Harbor, Germany. Obergefreiter Hans Weber watched the ruins of his homeland emerge through heavy fog. 18 months after his capture at Normandy, he was returning home with knowledge more dangerous than any military intelligence, the truth about America, delivered through Christmas turkey and Easter ham. The 372,000 German prisoners who survived American captivity faced an unexpected crisis upon repatriation. According to Allied occupation records preserved at the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz, over 68% reported severe anxiety about their homecoming. They had learned America wasn't the weak, godless enemy their government had described. Now they had to live among people who still believed the lies. Gefreiter Klaus Becker, who had written his wife Martha about Christmas cake in 1944, confided to an American chaplain aboard the repatriation vessel, "In America, I learned that abundance comes from freedom, that strength can be gentle, that enemies can be humane. Now I return to a Germany that has learned none of these lessons. How do I tell my neighbors that we were wrong about everything?" The reception at German processing centers proved brutal in its psychological intensity. According to testimonies collected by the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich, many prisoners faced immediate ostracism. Unteroffizier Otto Schneider returned to his village near Stuttgart in June 1946. His younger brother, who had lost an arm on the Eastern Front, refused to speak to him. His father asked one question at their reunion dinner: "Why did you not resist unto death?" The material contrast between American captivity and post-war German reality created profound cognitive dissonance. Prisoners had spent months eating 3,500 calories daily, sleeping in heated barracks, receiving medical care. They returned to a Germany where civilians survived on 1,200 calories of poor-quality rations, where housing shortages left millions in rubble. Lieutenant Ernst Wagner arrived home to find his family living in the basement of their bombed house in Hamburg. His first meal consisted of watery potato soup and a slice of dark bread, less food than he had received for breakfast in Camp Swift. Wagner's diary entry from May 23, 1946, preserved at the Hamburg State Archives, captures his anguish: "I have returned from abundance to destitution." Greta asked what America was like. I began to tell her about the Christmas dinner, the Easter feast, the respect for our traditions. She looked at me as if I were describing a fairy tale. I realized I cannot tell them the truth. The truth is too cruel, that our enemies treated us better than our own government ever did. By autumn 1946, occupation surveys showed that over 71% of repatriated prisoners chose silence about their American experiences. The social pressure proved overwhelming. Speaking positively about American treatment invited accusations of collaboration or disloyalty to fallen comrades. Hans Weber made a different choice. In October 1946, he began teaching English at a gymnasium in Munich. He quietly shared his experiences with students, not as propaganda but as testimony. According to his personnel file at the Bavarian State Archives, he faced multiple complaints from parents who accused him of promoting American ideology. In a 1947 interview with an American denazification officer, Weber explained, "They call me a traitor because I tell students the truth about American treatment. But the real betrayal was our government's lies that led us into an unjust war. My students deserve to know that the world is not what Nazi propaganda claimed." Yet not all prisoners embraced the revelation. Some clung desperately to Nazi ideology, unable to accept that their worldview had been built on lies. This tension erupted violently in Bremen in November 1946. Former prisoner Sturmmann Helmut Richter attacked Corporal Wilhelm Müller with a broken bottle after Müller spoke publicly about his positive treatment in American camps. The attack signaled that speaking truth about American captivity carried genuine physical danger. Nevertheless, some refused silence. Feldwebel Joseph Richter returned to his family's farm in Bavaria. Despite threats and social ostracism, he spoke openly at town meetings. In a 1948 letter to an American friend, he wrote, "My neighbors call me the American as an insult. They cannot accept that our propaganda lied. But I have seen the truth, and I will not unsee it. My children will grow up knowing that strength combined with mercy defeats strength combined with cruelty." The transformation created measurable long-term effects. Statistical analyses conducted by West German sociologists in the 1950s revealed significant differences between former American POWs and the general population. Of prisoners who spent at least 6 months in American camps, 73% supported democratic reforms versus 41% of the general population. Educational patterns proved particularly striking. Among former prisoners who had experienced both Christmas and Easter celebrations in American camps, 62% pursued further education after repatriation, nearly 4 times the national average. The occupations they chose reflected their transformed worldviews. 28% became teachers, 19% entered public service, 14% became small business owners. Martin Dietrich, the former Wehrmacht chaplain who had wept when Americans facilitated Christmas observances, became a prominent voice for German-American reconciliation. His 1952 book Gefangen von der Gnade, Captured by Grace, sold over 200,000 copies in West Germany. In the book's most quoted passage, Dietrich wrote, "The Americans defeated us twice, once on the battlefield through superior resources, and once in captivity through superior values. The second defeat proved more complete. They destroyed not our bodies but our illusions, not our cities but our false certainties. And they did this through the simple revolutionary act of treating enemies with dignity." The holiday celebrations, which had seemed like minor gestures of Geneva Convention compliance, rippled forward through generations. Hans Weber's granddaughter, in a 2003 oral history interview, recalled, "Opa would tell us about Christmas 1944 in Tennessee. He described the turkey, the hymns, the nativity scene. Then he would say, 'The Americans gave us back our humanity when we had lost it.' That Christmas dinner was the beginning of my real liberation, not from barbed wire, but from lies." By the 1970s, academic studies documented what testimonies had long suggested: German POWs who spent significant time in American camps showed markedly different political attitudes and social behaviors. A 1974 sociological study analyzed surveys of 2,400 former Wehrmacht soldiers. The findings were striking. American POWs showed 64% support for democratic institutions versus 38% for those with no captivity experience. Of the 372,000 German POWs held in American camps, fewer than 1% died in custody. Over 95% gained weight during captivity. But the deeper impact couldn't be measured in pounds gained or cavities filled. Exit interviews revealed that 89% stated their understanding of America had been fundamentally incorrect before capture. When asked what changed their minds, the most common response wasn't political lectures or re-education programs. It was simply, "They treated us like human beings." On April 1, 1995, exactly 50 years after that transformative Easter Sunday of 1945, 63 former German POWs returned to the United States for a reunion. Hans Weber, now 84, stood at the gate of former Camp Crossville. In an interview recorded for the Tennessee State Museum, he reflected, "I came through this gate expecting death. I found life. I expected cruelty. I found law. I expected contempt. I found dignity. The Americans never tried to convert us. They simply lived their values, and those values converted us through daily application." A Christmas turkey and an Easter ham destroyed Nazi propaganda more effectively than all the Allied bombing campaigns combined. The German prisoners who experienced American holiday dinners carried seeds of democratic ideals back to a devastated homeland. Those seeds grew slowly, quietly, but they grew. They shaped classrooms and town councils, businesses and churches, families and communities. The revelation that began with Christmas turkey in 1944 had come full circle. What the Nazi regime had feared, that contact with American values would corrupt German soldiers, had proven absolutely true. But the corruption was of lies, not of souls. In the end, the 372,000 German soldiers who returned from American captivity proved that propaganda cannot survive sustained contact with reality, that values demonstrated daily outlast slogans shouted loudly, and that treating enemies with mandated dignity can achieve what bullets and bombs never could. The Americans never knew what they had accomplished. They simply followed the Geneva Convention, served holiday meals, and went about their business. They defeated Germany twice, once through military might, once through moral example. But ask the grandchildren of men who ate Christmas turkey in Tennessee or Easter ham in Texas, and they will tell you, the turkey mattered. The ham mattered. The simple act of feeding enemies generously, treating them lawfully, and respecting their traditions, that changed everything. That was the weapon Nazi propagandists never anticipated and could never counter. That was how America won the peace while winning the war.